You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today we are diving into power rankings following week 2 of the UFL. And as we get set and look forward to now week number 3, there were awesome games from top to bottom this past weekend. Every single one of them being decided by a singular possession, with a handful of them ending as the clock was expiring. So plenty to discuss, plenty to get into. I invite you all to comment down below, share your power rankings with me. Do you agree or disagree with where I have everyone ranked? But we will dive right in, starting with number 8 and working our way up to the top here. We have the Houston Roughnecks as the new bottom team of the league. Offensive inconsistencies continuing to plague the team. And kind of a very similar situation to last week. Strong defensive performance being let down by an offense that just could not really get itself going. Hopefully Reuben Foster's ankle injury isn't anything that ends up hampering him or keeping him out during any duration of this season here. That was something that during that game I saw him go down, and immediately my first thought was, this is not what this team needs right now. But a defense that had a pick 6 early to give Houston an advantage. It held Jordan Ta'amu to 50% completion percentage. They stuffed the run, allowing only 82 yards on 26 attempts, which is a measly 3.2 yards per carry. They struggled in the red zone a little bit, allowing to DC to convert on 3 of those 4 trips that they made into the red zone altogether. But ultimately, it was a pretty solid performance on the defensive side. It just really came down to the offense not getting the job done. Jarrett Guarantano struggled. He went 3 of 8 for 23 yards before leaving the game with a back injury, and then quarterback Reed Sinnett comes in, and he has, I would say a pretty steady game. Didn't really put them in any bad positions by any means. He went 19 of 30, 221 yards, a touchdown boot with that as well. So a solid performance there from their quarterback. But then when it comes to the run game, man, I understand you don't have Mark Thompson right now and he was your lead running back, but it just feels like there is a severe lack of commitment as far as running the football is concerned here. TJ Pledger was averaging 4.3 yards per carry, but he only got 11 attempts, and I don't really understand why. It's not like this game was ever really out of hand, and it's not like, you were just flat out struggling to run the ball. TJ Pledger is a very capable running back, and I think he's proved that in the last couple of years in Houston, so I would have loved to see him get the rock more in this game because he was finding success, but ultimately just not being able to sustain drives. 3 of 13 on third down, only 1 trip into the red zone, and you failed to convert that trip into the red zone as well for points. I mean, just a flat out bad day for the team offensively, and again, another defensive effort wasted because you could not really get the ball moving or at least just sustain anything aside from a few scoring drives here or there, but it's just a really tough day altogether. Going into the number 7 spot now, leapfrogging them from the bottom of the UFL, I have now the DC Defenders with their victory over the Roughnecks we were just discussing there. Despite a rocky start, Jordan Ta'amu doing a big, and honestly, a clutch performance, I guess you could say, late in the game. Steps up, big time, helps leading the team to a victory. Started early with that pick 6, as I mentioned earlier, but then ultimately leading the offense to a 9-play, 83-yard drive that ultimately sends you into the lead to help finish things off and put the Houston Roughnecks away. It's clear that this passing attack is going to be different from what we saw from them last year. As we've talked about at length here, it's a completely different receiving core, and this one feels like it's a lot more about just distributing the football to as many people as possible and really keeping the defense guessing here. And when they were moving up tempo, they seemed to be clicking at a far higher rate than anything else. 6 different players targeted 3 times or more during that game. The run game continues to struggle. Obviously, losing your starting running back before the season even kicks off will kind of put you in that situation there, but it seems like it might be starting to sort itself out here. Cameron Harris might end up being the guy who breaks through as the lead back. He had 9 carries for 34 yards, 3.8 yards per carry, so a pretty solid number there, just under 4-yard average. But overall, I would say a solid effort from the offense despite some early struggles, especially late in the game there. And then defensively, I'm not really still sold on this unit, but I will say they took advantage of a Houston offense that is very clearly struggling right now. Forced fumble late in the third that kind of sparked back-to-back drives to help put you in the position to win that football game. And any drive that didn't end up as Houston points didn't go for anything more than 6 plays or less. You had a couple couple of 3-and-outs thrown in there as well, and you allowed only one singular red zone trip in 60 minutes. I would say a good performance at that. But again, I don't really know if I can walk away from this game going, okay, much improved by the defense, or did you just take advantage of a Roughnecks offense that after back-to-back weeks of really struggling might just be a bad offense altogether. So not sold on them. Obviously a step in the right direction for them, but I definitely still have my concerns. Hence why I have them at 7 and below the team that I have at number 6 in the Arlington Renegades that are now 0-2. What separates the Renegades and the DC Defenders for me really is just what we got from them this week, where it's clear that the Birmingham Stallions are probably a step above the rest at this point, and it's going to be a chase to try to top them. But when you look at how they played the first half against Birmingham last week, and then just a really tough third and fourth quarter, and then the way they played this week, I think I like the Arlington Renegades a little bit more than I do the DC Defenders, despite being 0-2 to the Defenders now 1-1. The offense finding some footing here, and it really felt like Luis Perez had his opportunity to essentially, rewrite the wrongs of last week in the matchup, going 21 of 29. He had 233 yards total. He had a touchdown as well. Never really put the football in a tough place. Wide receiver J.P. Payton had himself a monstrous day, 5 receptions, 83 yards. He had 16 on the ground on a rush as well. The run game, though, is a bit of a concern, and that is something that I think is kind of a little bit of a trend we kind of have right now in the UFL. It really feels like some of the passing attacks are far more fleshed out and further along than some of the running attacks that we've seen here. Off of 20 attempts, when you take out J.P. Payton's 16-yard scramble, 55 yards, averaging just about 2.7 yards per carry, 2.8 if you want to round up the number. Not a great day for them rushing, but ultimately, really the flaws are just in the defense, and that is something that we're going to have to see if this can change and end up, if maybe it improves going up against lesser opponents. I feel like the Arlington Renegades just unfortunately got the unlucky draw of the Birmingham Stallions offense week 1, St. Louis Battlehawks offense week number 2, and I know Battlehawks struggled a bit last week, but they had a pretty good reputation as an offense as a whole last season here, and maybe it just took them a little bit to get things going. But ultimately, I mean, St. Louis just on the ground took advantage of them. 41-yard run late in the game, essentially icing things for St. Louis in that matchup there. A.J. McCarron just ripping the ball all over the field, averaged 12.3 yards per completion. Pair of failures on fourth down to stop St. Louis from converting as well is something you have to point out as well. But 27 points now allowed in back-to-back weeks. Grand total of 54 leading the league is kind of a problem for them and something you're going to have to look at. But if the defense can just tighten up going up against some of the lesser offenses, I think Arlington has it in the tank to compete with some of the better units. You could definitely argue the DC Defenders probably belong above them, just being 1-1 on that front alone. But in just the way I'm kind of looking at these two teams right now, I think I'll take Arlington over DC when this matchup ends up eventually happening, unless things change vastly between now and then. But right now, I think I'm leaning Arlington just a little bit more because their offensive capabilities feel a step above where DC is right now, and I'm not really sold on either of these two teams' defenses. Again, even with DC having a better game this weekend, I'm still not necessarily sold on what they have, considering they were just going up against the Houston Roughnecks, but got completely blasted last week by the Brahmas. Going into number 5 here, a team dropping from the top 4 into the bottom 4 of the league. We are looking at the Michigan Panthers, losing 20-13 in a tough fight, a solid defensive effort, but just not quite enough against a Birmingham Stallions unit that was a force to be reckoned with, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Offensive line, obviously very concerning. You let up 7 sacks. I understand Birmingham Stallions defense is a force right now, and it's clear that they're starting to hit their stride pretty early right now. They looked really good last week and looked even better this week, creating just a ton of havoc and pressure for quarterback E.J. Perry. He was very up and down in the matchup, 20 of 33, 203 yards, touchdown, interception. He even got benched for a little bit early in the game until Danny Etling came in and fumbled the football away, and ultimately that was it for Danny Etling in the matchup. And I mean, besides wide receiver Marcus Sims' 76-yard score, there was really just not a ton to write home about for this offense. I'm a little bit concerned about it right now. I don't know if it's just EJ Perry catching a really good Birmingham Stallions defense that maybe shook him a little bit, but he was also kind of up and down last week. But when he settles into games, I feel very confident in him. It's just when he's not settled, I get a little bit worried about what he's doing on the football field. So if we can just protect him a little bit better in Michigan, I do think that there's a shot that this could be an offense that really gets the ball moving. There's big playability on this football team, and I think it's just a matter of this offensive line who kind of had some issues last year as well. And while they looked good in week one, kind of struggled going in, and I don't even want to say looked good because that's kind of not really, like, they didn't have the high sack total last week, but they did allow a fair amount of pressure. They only allowed a single sack, but there was a decent amount of pressure coming their way during that game. But ultimately, I do think that there is a potential for this offense, but that O-line needs to get itself sorted. Defensively, struggling to contain CJ Marable and Adrian Martinez. I think Adrian Martinez raised a lot of eyebrows this weekend with the way he was able to run with the football. He obviously got knocked out last week, so he didn't really get to play. But, I mean, CJ Marable just continues to be a utility running back where he can literally do whatever you need him to do, whether it's catching the football, running the football, and having the threat of Martinez come in and essentially just, like, blow things open for them offensively. Kind of a tough situation to find yourself in. It's always tough to deal with a quarterback that is able to scramble effectively. I mean, they combined for nearly 120 yards on the ground, but I will say that they made things difficult for Birmingham, and that is definitely worth mentioning here, forcing Birmingham to basically earn every single point they put on the board here. Held them to just 2 for 10 on third downs. They did well in the red zone. Birmingham had 6 total trips going into the red zone and only came away with 1 successful trip in the red zone there, so that is definitely worth mentioning. And you could say maybe they took a little bit of a step back this week, but ultimately, I definitely think they hung on. You're going up against a really good Birmingham offense. You kind of slowed the passing attack down. Nobody had more than 32 yards receiving as far as receivers went, so a solid performance nonetheless. And if you want to say it's a step back, I would say it's like the length of your foot step back. It's not even a full step back compared to how they played last week. I mean, you let up only 20 points against a Birmingham Stallions team that has rolled some defenses over the last few years. Coming in at number 4 now, working through the top half of the league, moving up a spot this week in the rankings, we have ourselves the St. Louis Battlehawks with their 27-24 win over Arlington as their offense reigning supreme and having themselves a day. A.J. McCarron, excellent performance, 19 of 29, nearly 250 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. Running back Mateo Durant, this was something that I really highlighted coming out of week number 1. They had to establish a solid running game, and going 14 for 104 yards and a touchdown, that big 41-yard that ultimately set them up for the game-winning field goal late. Awesome performance by them. O-line allowed 3 sacks. That is a little bit concerning because it felt like there was some pressure being allowed last week and now this week again. So that is, again, something you have to keep an eye on here. But if they can keep getting the ball out quickly, and if Mateo Durant ends up being the running back for them and he's able to be as successful as he was this past week, that's definitely a plus for the offense as a whole. And you also had wide receiver Marcel Aitman, who was absolutely killing the defense. I mean, the guy averaged 28 yards per reception or something like that. 4 catches, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Talk about just throttling the secondary. Defensively, this game kind of felt like defenses kind of went out the window towards the end there. It just felt like it was really a battle of just who's going to end up scoring more points. So that is a little bit of a cause for concern here because can you get away with that with some of the better offenses if that's how a game ends up turning out here? But I do think that they did a good job keeping Arlington's run in check. You kind of made them be one-dimensional, but the fact that they were one-dimensional and you were still kind of faltering to what you knew what was coming, again, a little bit of a concern. You were kind of at the mercy of Luis Perez, but ultimately got the job done. Defensive line up front created some solid pressure, 3 sacks on the day. Defensive end Pita, and I believe I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but I'm trying my best here. Taumo Penu was a big part of that. 5 tackles. He had 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Little unsure of where this defense stands right now in St. Louis. Because, yeah, they only allowed 18 points last week, but they kind of let the offense for Michigan catch fire late, and then now you go into this game here, and, Arlington looked like a vastly different offense than they did last week in that second half, so a little bit curious as to where this Battlehawks defense actually is going to stand, but that seems to be kind of a recurring theme that we're dealing with right now. There are some defenses that look really good and are really good, but then there's also a handful of defenses. I would say there's honestly like 2 defenses I really believe in, and about 6 of them that I'm just kind of sitting on the fence of like, where is this defense actually at right now, and are they products of the opponents they're facing, or are they as good or as bad as I think they are? That's kind of where I stand right now. But I like St. Louis in the top half of the league right now at 4. Memphis Showboats will be the number 3 team here. Despite losing this past week, I felt like keeping them here was key because, yes, it's a tough, ugly loss, but for 3 quarters almost, you basically had domination. And really, there's 2 things that I look at here that really wind up costing them this football game. And while it's very easy to point at the defense, and that's probably piece number 1 of it, it's easy to point at them for collapsing late in the game. I do think that there is a piece of this that the offense really needs to shoulder, and it comes down to just their inability to finish drives with touchdowns as opposed to field goals. You score on that opening drive, and then you're sitting on 4 field goals the remainder of the game here. If even one of those other 4 drives that ended in points, just not touchdowns, but a field goal, you wind up winning this football game because the Brahmas don't have enough time to put up more than 20 points in the fourth quarter to finish off the game and ultimately steal the win from you here. They were able to run more effectively this week, but it was a lot of Case Cookus taking advantage of opportunities and scrambling, but Darius Victor did get the ball going a little bit more this week, so it was nice to see that. But ultimately, not being able to run the football, not being able to kill the clock and come away with more points late in the game is really what costs you here. And again, I know it's easy to point at the defense and go, how did you allow 20 points in the fourth quarter as that, that drive started in the third and leaked into the fourth and ultimately touchdown, you stop in the you get into the fourth quarter there, you allow them to score, and then they ultimately convert the 4th and 12, and then they just kind of continue to roll. At that point, like, your defense has been on the field for so long, they're gassed. Like, that, what do you expect? Because when you look at the first 3 quarters or so of the game, we're talking 5 straight punts forced. 2 of the first 7 drives went for more than 3 plays. Like, that's ridiculous if you really just kind of look at that. But Chase Garbers flipped the switch, took advantage of a really tired defense late in the game. And again, that 4th and 12 is definitely a bit of a wild card that I'm kind of excited to see play out as we continue to go through this season here, because you get into that situation where you take a good decent chunk of change and keep that defense on the field for some time. You get the 4th and 12, get the ball back, and that defense has to come right back out on the field already gassed. You're in a really good position to take advantage and score. And San Antonio basically laid out, this is how it can be done. You can be down 2 scores with just a handful of minutes left in the game and can come away with a victory late because you're taking advantage of a gassed defense. So I really don't want to put all of this on the Memphis Showboats defense. They were great for 3 quarters. They had a phenomenal first half. It's just a matter of the offense not finishing drives. You should have come away with more than 19 points in this game, and that's really where I'm going to stand on with this. I like Memphis. I think they're a really good football team, and I don't think that they're worth dropping because of this loss. I think they should sit right at number 3 where I have them. At number 2, San Antonio Brahmas. This was a lot of mental gymnastics for me, I guess I could say, trying to keep them at number 2 here. Never give up attitude, 20 points in the fourth quarter, as I just discussed here. In bold letters in my notes here, I have flatlined for the offense in the first half here. It literally took Chase Garbers and just dragging this offense, like kicking and screaming, to help lead this team to a win here to the tune of 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. You had Marquez Stevenson catching the first one, John Trey Kirkland catching the second one, Cody Latimer ultimately catching the game winner. 3 touchdowns to put things away late in the game here. The run was completely snuffed out. You averaged 2 yards per carry, not including the 20 yards that Chase Garbers grabbed on a couple of scrambles he had here. But I'm a little bit just confused as to what this offense actually is, because we now have 5 quarters of really good San Antonio Brahmas offense, or if you want to say 5.5, if you really want to say that, that's fine too. You get 5.5 really good quarters from the San Antonio Brahmas offense, but there is a good 2.5, 3 quarters of offense that looked awful. So I'm what am I supposed to believe here? Do I believe in the one good game plus the really strong fourth quarter and opportunistic, opportunity taking, risk taking, whatever you want to call it, that happened there in the fourth quarter? Big risk, high payoff type stuff that we were seeing from the coaching, deciding to go for the 4th and 12 and all of that. Little bit concerned there, but if there's one thing that's really constant for me so far and I'm really buying into, is this San Antonio Brahmas defense. I mean, you have to give them credit where it is due for hanging on the way they did. You were bending and bending and bending, but never truly broke in a game where your offense, again, was flatlined for the better part of like more than half of the game here. To get yourself in a position where your offense has not gone for more than like 3 plays and a handful of drives, and you're still just holding to field goals, keeping this game within reach. The fact that somehow, some way, the Showboats only managed to have 19 points on the board when things started to, sway in their direction. You've got to give this defense a load of credit. You look at like linebacker Jordan Williams and safety Jordan Mosley, the 2 Jordans over here, showing up again back-to-back weeks on defense. They notched 18 tackles together this week, and they also had 18 last week. So a combined 36 tackles between the 2 of them in the last couple of weeks. You also have a guy like outside linebacker Wyatt Ray. He had 3 tackles for loss, a sack in this game as well. This defense as a whole just has like a never say die, never give up type of attitude, very high motor. They are just constantly going and fighting tooth and nail despite the situation that they're in. And I do think the Brahmas boast a very good defense, all things considered. It's very difficult to play defense when your offense is not moving at all, because you are out there basically in 3 plays or less sometimes is basically the situation they were in. Like I said, 2 of 7 drives went for more than 3 plays to kick off the game for the San Antonio Brahmas offense. That means the defense just kind of basically had to keep going out there. They played so many snaps from the first quarter going well into the third quarter, and for them to hang on the way they did, you got to tip your cap to that. Excellent performance by them, and I do think they boast one of the best defenses in the UFL right now. And then, of course, at number 1, last team, but certainly not the least team by any means, we have the Birmingham Stallions. Quarterback uncertainty is probably going to be the biggest thing that we have to follow with the Stallions team for the early portion of the season until it kind of sorts itself out. Obviously, the 2-quarterback system is kind of in play right now. We've heard Skip Holtz talk about that a couple of times over the last few weeks and even coming into the season as well. But Matt Corral struggling again this week. Adrian Martinez comes in and kind of lights a fire under the offense here. I mean, you saw what he did. 88 yards passing through the air, 65 yards rushing on the ground here. Passing attack was very off schedule this week. As I mentioned earlier, nobody caught more than 32 yards worth of passes this past week for the Birmingham Stallions, which is kind of crazy considering just how, potent this offense can be. So that is something you have to keep an eye on here. But CJ Marable, one of the best running backs in this league right now, and honestly should be somewhere in the NFL, in my opinion, come this season's end. Like, I know he got some looks this past offseason, but I think he boasts way too much talent to not be in the NFL right now, at least on a team's depth chart, even if he is just running back 2 or 3. But between him and Adrian Martinez keeping the football moving on the ground, excellent job by them to keep this team afloat. But if there's anyone that deserves a ton of praise coming out of this game here, it has got to be the defense, because this defense in Birmingham is shaping up to be just an absolute monster of a unit here. 7 sacks, 8 tackles for loss altogether on the day. The defensive front needs a ton of credit, because not only were we talking sacks, tackles for loss, we were getting batted passes and breakups from defensive linemen in this game here. Defensive end Taco Charlton, a guy who has spent some decent amount of time in the NFL, clearly a step above the rest in this game here with 3 sacks on the day. Nose tackle Carlos Davis came away with a couple sacks himself. Defensive tackle Dondrea Tillman forced a fumble on Danny Etling, who came in to kind of relieve EJ Perry for struggling and then ultimately got himself yanked out of the game because of it. Not to mention you had an interception from AJ Thomas. The team in total, 7 pass breakups on the day, in a game where, your offense was just not quite clicking the way it needs to be a championship caliber team. You had your defense come in and not only play at a championship caliber level, but just like a dominating type of level where this is like boys, like men amongst boys playing football here is kind of what it felt like. The defense absolutely came to play. And this was a story that we kind of saw from the Stallions last year, where they had games that offensively just things did not really go their way, but the defense was able to step up and just take over. And this was one of the most dominating displays I think we've seen from the Birmingham Stallions defense over the last 2.5 now years or so, and some change, something along those lines. If this is what the defense is going to round itself into, I don't even want to know what they're going to look like come weeks 5, 6, 7 and like the tail end of the season. Best of luck, because this defense, the first 2 weeks of the season has been a threat, forcing a ton of turnovers last week and just completely demolishing at the line of scrimmage this week here. They're going to be a problem for teams to deal with. But those are my power rankings following week number 2 as we head into week number 3 of the UFL. Let me know in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? How would you rank these 8 teams in the UFL? But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.